How do people know we're Christian? How do they know? Seriously, what tips them off? There are a lot of ways to answer this question, but today we answer it by saying, because we bear the fruit of patience. To help us understand patience better, we need to turn our attention to the minor prophets. At first reading, the minor prophets seem all over the place. They're crazy. There's praise and blame, hate and hope. You really need a map and a history book sitting next to you. Otherwise, you really get lost in the quagmire. There are wars and then more wars. There are good kings and bad kings. There's threats of punishment. There's forgiveness. There's evil inner thoughts, oracles against nations, retribution, political allegiances, political turmoil, environmental degradation, human trafficking. Basically, the minor prophets have all kinds of human depravity. Yet through this quagmire, there's also a crimson thread that moves us towards hope and restoration. Like I said, the minor prophets, they're a lot. And today we land right in the middle of them with this prophet from Habakkuk. And I'll be honest, it's hard to spell. Habakkuk. I grew up saying Habakkuk, but I've also heard it as Habakkuk. I could not tell you which way is right, but I can also tell you I don't think it really matters. What does matter is we know very little about this guy, other than he's fearful of the Chaldeans, which is another name for the Babylonians. Look at Habakkuk 1, 6, and 7. For I am rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they. This dates Habakkuk somewhere around the late 6th century before Jesus, about the time Babylon sacks Judah and sends the Judeans into exile. This little verse gives us a lot of historical detail, and we can surmise this is a turbulent time. Another detail that can help us is to whom Habakkuk is speaking. The answer matters and is quite unique when compared to all the other prophets, because Habakkuk is speaking to God. Most prophetic writings are to a group of people, but this whole book is Habakkuk lamenting, crying, yelling, fiercely even attacking God. And then God answers back. It's a short book, but profoundly important to our own theology because it gives us permission, even a rubric, for how we can speak to God. So follow me for a second. I have had people in my life tell me, you can't question God. As helpful as these people are trying to be, I've learned they're wrong. The Bible preaches the opposite. You can question God. You can wail and moan and yell and cuss and raise your fists to the sky demanding answers from God. God can take it. Doesn't mean God's going to answer it, but God can take it. Why would we ever think God couldn't? You can take your frustration and pain to God. Habakkuk did. And because he did, we see all kinds of things unfold. So, let's jump into this. Here they are. They're about to be crushed, the Judeans, by an evil unlike any they've ever seen. Habakkuk is feeling the weight of this brokenness, and he begins to scream to God. Look at chapter 1, starting in verse 2. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? I cry to you violence and you will not save. Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Verse 2 is gut-wrenching. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? I cry to you violence, and you will not save. Here's the deal. And we touched on this during our sermon series on joy. To be human is to suffer. And when we feel the weight of our suffering, we too have said something very similar to God, like Habakkuk. There's a sports story that rattles in my head a lot. The Vanderbilt Commodores won the College World Series a few years ago, and there was a pitcher on their team. His name was Tyler. Tyler's mom died in his arms when he was 8 years old. He bounced around from friend's house to friend's house. His dad wasn't in the picture. He lived a difficult childhood, fueled by the pain of losing everyone close to him. So he did what felt natural as a kid. He pushed anyone close to him away. But he could play baseball. That was until he blew his elbow out his senior year, sidelining him from any college chance. Vandy had recruited him hard as a junior, and they still wanted him, despite his injury. So he got a second chance. But days before starting college, he had to call his head coach to tell him that he couldn't start school. He and his high school girlfriend were expecting a baby. Vanderbilt's coach had never had a dad on the team before, but he told Tyler, "Listen, we'll work it out." Tyler and his girlfriend ended up moving to Nashville. They delivered a beautiful baby girl who was born with Down syndrome, creating even more beautiful yet additional challenges for this young teenage couple. Tyler is juggling one of the most academically rigorous schools in the Southeast, playing on one of the best sports teams in the nation. He's a newlywed, newly fathered, no mother, no family, orphaned at 8 years old, dealing with an emotional and mental stresses that hardly any of us can fathom. I think about this young man's story a lot. It reminds me, life is hard. It throws us curveball after curveball, tripping us up, forcing us down. And if there was anyone who could have said, "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for you, and you will not help, you will not listen?" it's Tyler. This was also true for Judah, and their entire way of life was hanging in the balance. I'm not trying to say Tyler's story is equivalent to Habakkuk's, but I am saying that in our own way, life is hard. Everyone we meet is fighting something most of us can't see. Addictions, losses in jobs, frustrations with family, breakups, brokenness, financial hardships that leave us emotionally, mentally fragile, PTSD, cancer, death of loved ones. We all have things others can't see. And most of us are going through life grinning and bearing it. This was the case for Habakkuk. So he opened up his heart. He told God what he thought about all of this. And we can too. The Bible calls this kind of prayer lament. When you're hurting, when you feel like you're dying, when you feel the weight of light suffering, let God know about it. God can take it. And how Habakkuk does this serves as a model for all of us who suffer too. Here's what he does. He follows the biblical format for lament. First, he cries to God. He addresses God with his hurt. Second, he complains. He lets God hear his anger and sadness. And when he does this, it's wildly cathartic. And in a mystical way, when we do this, just like Habakkuk, God hears us and engages us. Which brings up an important point. Habakkuk is not heard because it takes pain for God to hear him, but it's because of his pain that he opens his awareness to hearing from God. God always hears our prayers, but it's in our suffering that we finally open ourselves up to hearing God too. At least I hope you'll turn to God in your suffering. Some of us blame God for our misfortunes, but the God of love never rains down suffering on you. Instead, the God of love meets you in yours and comforts you through it. Habakkuk 1 is a dialogue with God. It's a back and forth, the two of them, and it's worth reading because when we get to chapter 2, look what Habakkuk says. Chapter 2, verse 1. I will stand at my watchpost, station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. The man who was broken to the core is now ready to wait upon the Lord. This is no small change. How is Habakkuk able to make this change? He lamented. Even in distress and pain, his faith in God tells him he'll hear something soon. And sure enough, he does. Chapter 2, verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It surely will come. It will not delay. This is the third step of lament. Affirmation of trust. It's us saying, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, and I will wait as long as I need to. Lord, I believe, because my faith knows you're in this with me. This third step is the hardest, but the most crucial. Because Habakkuk does it, we get an incredible verse in Habakkuk 2:4, which actually becomes the cornerstone for Paul's theology on justification by faith. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. This is true for us too. Our faith tells us that God meets us in our suffering. That's pretty much the entire story of Jesus. He steps into our suffering world and suffers our suffering unto himself. And this is what lament reminds us. When we bring our sadness to God, our heart opens to God's presence. Our minds lock in to God's grace. Our soul feels the depth of faith, and we are comforted that we worship a God who meets us in our suffering. And that's where we find patience. And when we do this, we take the fourth step of lament, assurance. Look at Habakkuk does in chapter 3, verse 2. O Lord, I have heard of your renown, and I stand in awe. O Lord, of your work, in our own time revive it. In our own time make it known. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. In his own time, God, I know you will revive all of this. In your own way, the earth will be filled with your praise. This is faith. No perfect person needs faith. Faith is believing that God is there even when we suffer. Habakkuk should have been fed up waiting on God, but he's not. Lament helps him move past his anger. He arrives at a firmer foundation, and by the start of the second chapter, he's ready to stand on a watchtower and wait. But by chapter 3, he's fully on board with God's plan, and he has the endurance to wait. That's patience. Habakkuk shows us a wonderful process for patience, and it still applies today. After Vandy won the College World Series, Tyler had pitched some crucial innings, and he did great. In a post-game interview, the reporter asked him, "Were you nervous?" It didn't appear you pitched the biggest innings of your life. It didn't appear you had any pressure on you. Tyler's response captured me. He said, "Pressure? Listen, I've experienced pressure. Pitching a few innings of baseball, that's not pressure. It was fun." If you're a sports fan, this would have given you pause. Because, yes, these moments are fun, but they're the epitome of pressure. The entire season is on the line, coming down to a single action. All those hours of work, all those people watching and hoping, they could either be crushed or excited. Even his future depends on these few seconds of how he acts. And he stands fearless? How? Well, he's a college baseball player, so he's probably kind of cocky. But I think it's also because he understands lament. He's moved past his anger. He's worked through suffering, and he's found something hidden in it. He's found faith. I would argue Tyler understands the fruit of patience. This is powerful, and it's something we have to remember too. God is able to bear the pain we feel, and this is why we lament. Naming our grief, sharing it in community, leads us into the deeper knowledge that somehow, somewhere, God is in control of this. Habakkuk is a powerful testimony that no matter what we're feeling, we can lift our heads out of the darkness and we can declare just like Habakkuk does, "O Lord, I have heard of your renown and I stand in awe. O Lord, of your work, in your own time, revive it."